Rian sat quietly at the edge of his kitchen counter, a wooden spoon dangling in his hand, pasta sauce dripping lazily onto the floor. The laughter in the room was not his. It belonged to Celine and her trio of friends, Leora, Mira, and Suri. Celine had just finished mocking him for daring to ask where she was going for the weekend. She had laughed in his face, turned to her friends, and announced with exaggerated amusement, "Stop acting like we're married. You don't get a say in where I go or who I'm with." The words cut like glass, not because they were cruel, but because they were followed by the symphony of the three friends cackling. Rian stood still, watching her smug expression, and instead of anger, he felt something unexpected: peace. For 2 years, Rian and Celine had lived in the fragile balance of love and irritation, though lately, irritation had dominated. Celine was dramatic, a force of performance. She treated life as a stage, with her friends as the ever-present audience, cheering at her every line. Rian, on the other hand, was the quiet sort. He worked from home as a graphic designer. His joys were simple: new frozen pizzas on Friday nights, the comfort of his leather sketchpad, and peaceful evenings with music humming faintly from the background. Yet here he was, mocked in his own kitchen by the very woman who claimed to love him. "You heard her, Rian," Leora sneered, her heavily jeweled fingers tapping against the counter. "You really don't get a say." Mira giggled, leaning against the fridge. "He's cute when he looks confused, isn't he?" Celine grinned as though she were the star of a comedy show. Rian, holding back his words, only smiled, a wide, empty smile that carried no warmth. Inside his mind, he pictured a tiny version of himself packing bags, putting on a hat, and leaving the scene. That tiny voice that once begged him to try harder in this relationship had just resigned. The girls swept out of the house soon after, Celine leading them with her chin tilted high. They were off to some pre-weekend cocktail gathering, ready to gossip and laugh about the man Celine left behind. Rian stood in the silence of his kitchen long after they were gone, the pasta sauce still bubbling softly on the stove. "Not married. No say," he whispered to himself, as if engraving the phrase into stone. Then he allowed himself a chuckle. Got it. At that moment, a spark of an idea began forming, one that would change everything. Friday afternoon arrived with Celine's car packed to the brim with clothes, glittery makeup, and bottles of rose. She didn't even bother saying goodbye. The tires screeched down the street, leaving Rian standing in his doorway, a grin slowly spreading across his face. He wasn't sad. He wasn't angry. He was exhilarated. His plan had begun. The first step was simple but crucial: visit Madame Maureen, his 80-year-old neighbor whose sharp eyes saw everything that happened on their street. Madame Maureen sat on her porch sipping tea, her rose garden blooming gloriously behind her. She loved two things deeply: her roses and neighborhood drama. When Rian brought her a slice of lemon cake, her eyes lit up. You want something," she said knowingly, her voice rich with mischief. Rian leaned forward, explaining what Celine had told him in front of her friends. "Stop acting like we're married." He didn't exaggerate. The truth alone was powerful enough. Madame Maureen's face twisted with righteous indignation. "That shameless girl," she muttered. "Don't you worry, Rian. What do you need me to do?" Rian gave her a script. When Celine inevitably returned and found herself locked out, Madame Maureen would appear, confused, concerned, and full of perfectly chosen words. She would tell Celine about Rian's wonderful weekend and his transformation. The older woman's eyes glittered with excitement, like an actress handed the lead role in a play. "Leave it to me," she said, patting his hand with maternal reassurance. With his accomplice secured, Rian went back to his house to begin what he called Operation Bachelor Pad Resurrection. For months, his home had been smothered under Celine's beige aesthetic. Beige pillows, beige rugs, art pieces so abstract they looked like printer accidents. It wasn't his home anymore. It was her showroom. Now, with her gone, he had the freedom to reclaim it. He got boxes and labeled them carefully: everyday clothes, fancy dresses for fancy places I'm not invited to, shoes, a podiatrist's nightmare, face paint, and goops. Each label brought a cathartic smile to his face. By Saturday morning, Celine's entire existence had been boxed up and removed. Rian hired movers to take everything to a storage unit. 1 month of rent was paid in advance, which he thought was generous given her declaration that they weren't married. Then he went on a spree. The beige rug was rolled away and replaced with an astroturf rug shaped like a football field. The sterile couch was replaced with a massive black leather recliner sofa with 16 cup holders. A pinball machine took the place of her minimalist coffee table. And then came the crown jewel, an enormous St. Bernard puppy named Gus, who waddled into the house like a furry wrecking ball and claimed the recliner as his own. By Sunday evening, the transformation was complete. The beige prison Celine had crafted was gone. Rian sat on his new recliner sofa, with Gus snoring beside him, the dog's massive head heavy on his lap. He looked around the room with pride. The glowing pinball machine lights flickered, the AstroTurf rug gave the place character, and the Wi-Fi network had been renamed Get Your Own Wi-Fi. The password was now not married lol. He chuckled as he typed it in on his phone. This, he whispered to Gus, is what freedom feels like. At exactly 9 p.m., his doorbell camera buzzed. Rian's phone screen lit up. Celine was back. She strolled up the walkway, humming, her face glowing from her weekend trip. She pulled out her key, pushed it into the lock, and stopped. It didn't turn. Her brows furrowed. She tried again. Nothing. A third try, followed by an annoyed sigh. Rian, she called, banging on the door. Open up. What's wrong with this stupid lock? Gus lifted his head, let out a single rumbling woof, and promptly went back to sleep. Celine grabbed her phone and began calling. The device buzzed on Rian's pinball machine, her name flashing across the screen. He calmly declined. It rang again. Declined. 5 more times. Each time, he pressed decline with deliberate patience, sipping his beer in between. The banging on the door grew louder. Rian, I'm serious. Open this door. My key isn't working. She sounded more frantic now, her voice cracking under the weight of disbelief. Rian leaned back, amused, waiting for the next act of the show. Right on cue, Madame Maureen's porch light flickered on. The elderly neighbor stepped outside in her housecoat, holding a watering can. Oh, Celine, dear, is that you? She called, feigning surprise. Celine almost ran to the edge of the porch. Thank God, Madame Maureen. My key isn't working. Is Rian home? I can see the lights on. Madame Maureen tilted her head with deliberate slowness. Oh, he's home, child. And you won't believe the wonderful weekend he's had. A real transformation. Celine blinked, confusion written across her face. Transformation?
What are you talking about?
Madame Maureen leaned on her railing, her voice hushed but dripping with drama. He told me the good news. Said you two aren't married. Said you don't get a say in his life. So, he decided to celebrate. Redecorated the whole house. It's a man's home now, very rugged. The delight in the old woman's tone made the scene feel like theater. Celine's jaw dropped. He what? Madame Maureen's eyes twinkled. Oh yes, and the best part. He got a dog. A big, beautiful boy named Gus. He said he wanted someone loyal, someone who doesn't talk back. Isn't that sweet? Celine's face contorted, horror mixing with rage. She turned, pressing her face against Rian's living room window. From the couch, Rian saw her eyes widen at the sight of Gus sprawled across the new sofa, the glowing pinball machine, and the football rug. The sound she made, a strangled mix of scream and sob, was pure theater. Her phone lit up his screen again, this time with an avalanche of texts, long blocks of angry, all caps fury. Rian finally decided to respond. He typed one simple message. You said to stop acting like we're married. You said, I don't get a say. I agree. This is my house. You don't get a say here. Your belongings are safely stored at 123 Storage Way, Unit 42. The code is 1234. You have 1 month.
Take care.
He pressed send, then blocked her number. Through the window, he saw her read the message. Her face morphed into disbelief. She let out a scream that echoed down the street, hurling her phone onto the lawn. For 10 minutes she ranted and raved, stomping her heels, shouting words too chaotic to follow. Finally, a car pulled up, Myra's. Celine stomped into the vehicle, slamming the door hard enough to rattle the windows. Rian raised his beer in a mock salute. "Cheers," he muttered to himself. The social media storm began the next morning. Vague posts flooded Celine's page, sad music playing over slideshows of sunsets, captions about betrayal, strength, and cutting out toxic energy. Her friends chimed in, reposting dramatic quotes about strong women and weak men. It was pathetic in its predictability. But Rian didn't take the bait. He watched, patient, already planning his next move. He wasn't going to argue with her online. No, he was going to let the truth speak for itself, and he had the perfect way to do it. 2 days later, while Celine's vague posts still filled social media, Rian struck back, not with anger but with irony. He uploaded an album only visible to their mutual friends. The first photo showed his living room in its old state, the pale beige couch, the lifeless bowls, the bland artwork. The caption simply read, "Before." The next photo was a sharp contrast. The new recliner sofa with 16 cup holders, the AstroTurf rug like a mini football field, the glowing pinball machine, and Gus stretched out like a furry king. The caption read, "After." The final picture was the one that truly hit home, a selfie of Rian and Gus together, both looking ridiculously happy. Gus's droopy face made him appear like a wise old guardian, while Rian's smile glowed with newfound peace. The caption was short but cutting. "She told me we're not married and I don't get a say. So I redecorated accordingly. #BachelorPad, #dog-is-my co-pilot, #no say no stay." The post exploded. Friends who had once expressed sympathy towards Celine now saw the bigger picture. Laughter filled the comment section. "Legendary move," one friend wrote. Another added, "That dog is the upgrade of the century." Screenshots spread, and the narrative shifted completely. No longer was Rian the villain in Celine's story. Instead, he became the man who had simply believed her words and acted accordingly. The irony was too sharp to ignore, and people loved it. Celine and her friends went silent. For all their dramatics, they couldn't compete with the cuteness of Gus and the undeniable logic of Rian's post. The victim narrative collapsed under the weight of reality. Mira tried once more, posting a cryptic message about men who can't handle strong women, but the comments undercut her. "Strong? Or just messy?" someone replied. The tide had turned, and Celine was left exposed. The consequences came fast. Celine stayed with Mira for less than a week before the arrangement fell apart. "She complains non-stop," Mira reportedly told another friend. "And she doesn't pay rent." Celine then moved back to her parents' house 3 hours away. It was a humiliating return, one that she blamed squarely on Rian. She told anyone who would listen that he had ruined her life. Rian only shook his head when the gossip reached him.
No, he thought.
She ruined her own. Her last attempt at retaliation came in the form of a lawyer's letter. It accused Rian of wrongful eviction and demanded compensation for making her homeless. Rian handed the letter to his own lawyer, who responded with surgical precision. He included copies of Rian's mortgage, proof that Celine's name was nowhere on any lease or utility, and even hinted that Celine might owe back payment for 6 months of food, rent, and electricity she had enjoyed for free. After that, silence. The lawyer vanished like mist. Weeks passed. Rian's life settled into a rhythm he had not felt in years. His house felt alive again, not stifled by beige silence. Gus became his loyal shadow, following him from room to room, snoring at his feet while he worked on his designs. The dog was chaos incarnate, drooling on the sofa, stealing socks, knocking over the pinball machine, but Rian adored him. For the first time, his home truly felt like his. One crisp afternoon at the dog park, Rian was tossing a tennis ball when a familiar face appeared. Suri, the third friend, usually the quietest of the trio, approached hesitantly. Her voice was soft, uncertain. "Rian, hey." He raised an eyebrow but stayed silent. She shifted awkwardly. "I just wanted to say, I'm sorry. That night at your house. We were cruel. We shouldn't have laughed at you like that. Rian shrugged.
Celine said what she said.
I just believed her. Suri gave a small, tired laugh.
Yeah.
She's a lot. She called me last week, complaining that her parents are making her get a job. Said it was all your fault. I didn't even know what to say. She glanced at Gus, who at that moment was trying to fit 3 tennis balls in his mouth at once. Honestly, though, she added, it looks like you're doing just fine. Rian smiled at that, his heart lighter than it had been in years. I am, he said simply. And he truly meant it. Life moved on smoothly after Suri's apology at the park. Rian found it strange how quickly the storm had passed. Only a month ago, his home had been the stage for Celine's dramatic laughter and her friend's cruel mocking. Now, it echoed with Gus's deep snores and the sound of squeaky toys. His evenings were calm again. No glitter scattered across the floor, no endless phone calls filled with gossip, no fights over whose turn it was to order takeout. Just peace. And for Rian, peace was more valuable than any performance. He often replayed the moment Celine had said those fateful words, "Stop acting like we're married. You don't get a say." At the time, it had felt humiliating. But now, he understood it as a strange gift. She had revealed the truth of how she saw him. Not as a partner, but as an accessory. And he had done the one thing she never expected. He agreed with her. By embracing her statement, he had freed himself. Gus, in his own chaotic way, became part of Rian's healing. The dog was messy, loud, and impossible to ignore, but he was also loyal. Rian laughed when Gus stole socks and ran around the living room like a victorious thief. He smiled when the dog flopped onto his lap, far too large to be a lapdog, but insistent all the same. At least you don't talk back, Rian often joked, scratching Gus behind the ears. In Gus, he had found the opposite of Celine, simple, genuine companionship. Meanwhile, Celine's life seemed to spiral. Rumors drifted back through mutual friends. Her parents demanded she contribute to the household. She bounced between temporary jobs, and she complained constantly that Rian had ruined everything. Yet every complaint only made her look smaller. Her once fierce pride had turned brittle. People who used to cheer at her dramatics grew tired. Even Mira and Leora stopped defending her publicly. The audience she had always counted on began to drift away. One evening, as Rian scrolled through his messages, he stumbled across a group chat he had once shared with Celine and her friends. It was quiet now, abandoned. He read back through old conversations, where Celine would boast about small victories or mock him for asking simple questions. His stomach twisted at the memories, but instead of anger, he felt gratitude. He had lived through it. He had learned. And he would never allow himself to be treated that way again. Madame Aurine remained his most enthusiastic supporter. Almost every day, she would wave from her porch and ask, "How's the bachelor fortress, Rian?" He would laugh, giving her updates about Gus's antics. One morning, she brought over a basket of roses and said, "That girl thought she was the sun, and you were just a planet. But you see, the universe doesn't revolve around anyone, especially not around her." Rian nodded, deeply touched by her blunt wisdom. At times, Rian wondered if Celine would ever try to return. Not legally, but emotionally. Would she call him, apologize, ask for another chance? The thought lingered, but he knew the answer. Celine thrived on drama, not accountability. An apology from her would be like snow in the desert, impossible and unnatural. If she ever reached out, he would not respond. He had learned to believe people the first time they revealed themselves. His friends admired the way he had handled everything. At a small gathering one weekend, one of them raised a glass. To Rian, they toasted. The man who turned heartbreak into a home renovation. The table erupted in laughter. Rian shook his head, embarrassed but pleased. Honestly, he admitted, I didn't plan revenge. I just listened. She said we weren't married. She said I didn't get a say. So I stopped giving her one. That's all. His honesty resonated with them. Sometimes the simplest answers were the strongest. Late at night, Rian often sat on the recliner with Gus curled beside him, reflecting on everything that had happened. He thought about the silence after Celine's departure, the peace that replaced the constant chaos. "Funny," he whispered one night, staring at the pinball machine's glowing lights. "The best revenge wasn't anything I did. It was just letting her words come true." Gus gave a sleepy grunt, as though agreeing. And Rian smiled, realizing he had finally found what he had always wanted, his own space, his own freedom, and a life filled with laughter that belonged to him alone. Weeks turned into months, and Celine became a fading shadow in Rian's life. Her name no longer stirred anger or embarrassment. It was just part of his past. Sometimes, a friend would mention hearing about her latest troubles, arguments with her parents, failed job attempts, another dramatic social media post, but Rian barely reacted. "That's her journey," he'd say calmly. For him, the chapter was closed. His story had moved forward, and his new companion, Gus, filled every gap with joy and loyalty. One afternoon, at the park, Rian overheard two strangers gossiping about Celine without realizing he had once been part of her story. "Did you hear about that girl who thought her boyfriend owed her everything? She ended up moving back with her parents." The other laughed. "Oh, I heard she lost him to a dog." Rian chuckled under his breath, tossing Gus another tennis ball. The irony was delicious. His life had become lighter, while Celine's drama had become nothing more than a passing anecdote for strangers. His home became a hub for friends again. People dropped by, not to endure Celine's sharp remarks, but to relax and laugh. The football rug was a conversation starter, the pinball machine a quirky centerpiece, and Gus, without fail, the star of the evening. Guests would feed him treats and take selfies with him. Rian would shake his head with amusement. "He's the real landlord here," he joked. And in many ways, Gus was the guardian of Rian's newfound happiness. Madame Maureen, too, basked in the afterglow of the drama. Whenever she told the story to neighbors, she added dramatic flair. "And then she screamed," Aureen would say, waving her arms. Screamed so loud the roses shook. But Rian, cool as a cucumber, just sipped his beer. "And that dog. Oh, you should have seen that dog," snored through the whole thing. Rian never corrected her embellishments. She had earned the right to tell the tale however she wished. One quiet evening, sitting with Gus by his side, Rian thought about what he had learned. Relationships, he realized, weren't about who shouted the loudest or who performed for an audience. They were about respect, kindness, and shared peace. Celine had offered him none of those, only noise and mockery. And when she declared he had no say, she unknowingly gave him the greatest freedom of all, the freedom to let go. Rian shared his story with a close friend over coffee. "It wasn't revenge," he explained, stirring his drink slowly. "It was acceptance. She told me what I meant to her. I just believed her. And once I did, everything became clear. I didn't fight. I didn't beg. I just stepped aside and lived my life." His friend nodded thoughtfully. Sometimes, the friend said, believing someone is the strongest response of all. Celine's name still floated around occasionally, attached to gossip or half-truths. But to Rian, it no longer mattered. He had chosen a different story, one that didn't require her approval or her presence. His world was no longer beige and lifeless. It was colorful, vibrant, filled with the sound of Gus's paws on the floor and the laughter of true friends. His house was not just a building anymore, it was a sanctuary. At the heart of it all was the simple lesson he carried. When people reveal who they are, believe them. Celine had revealed herself clearly, and Rian had finally listened. That choice saved him years of exhaustion, years of trying to fix something that wasn't broken but was never real in the first place. He smiled often now, not the empty smile of a man hiding frustration, but the genuine grin of someone who had found balance. And so, Rian's story ended not with bitterness, but with peace. Celine drifted into the past, her drama swallowed by time, while Rian thrived in his new life. He had his freedom, his home, his dog, and his dignity. One evening, as Gus rested his giant head on Rian's lap, the man whispered, "You're the best decision I ever made, buddy." Gus gave a soft snore in reply. And in that small, simple moment, Rian knew this was his happy ending. Please like, comment, and subscribe.